Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to embark on an incredible journey through one of history's most captivating warrior cultures and explore a question that has intrigued historians, martial artists, and curious minds for centuries. We're talking about the samurai of feudal Japan and their legendary relationship with perhaps the most famous sword in human history, the katana. Now, when most people think of samurai, they immediately envision these noble warriors wielding their curved blades with deadly precision, but there's so much more to this story than what we see in movies and popular culture. The samurai weren't just skilled swordsmen, they were the product of a complex social system, rigorous training methods, philosophical beliefs, and technological innovations that combined to create some of the most formidable warriors the world has ever known. The katana itself wasn't just a weapon, it was the soul of the samurai, a masterpiece of metallurgy and craftsmanship that took centuries to perfect. So get comfortable, maybe grab a cup of tea or coffee, and let's dive deep into this fascinating world together. What made a samurai's connection to their katana so special that they would literally live and die by their blade? And why were they so incredibly deadly with this particular weapon, when compared to warriors from other cultures who wielded different types of swords and weapons? The story begins in a time when Japan was a land of constant warfare, where survival depended not just on strength or courage, but on the mastery of incredibly sophisticated fighting techniques that were passed down through generations like precious family heirlooms. The emergence of the samurai class in Japan during the Heian period, roughly between the 8th and 12th centuries, coincided with a time when the country was experiencing significant political and social upheaval. The imperial court in Kyoto was losing its grip on power, and local lords called daimyo were beginning to assert their independence, creating a need for professional warriors who could serve as both protectors and enforcers of their authority. These early samurai weren't initially the romanticized figures we know today. They were practical warriors who emerged from the necessity of protecting land, resources, and political interests in a rapidly changing society. The word samurai itself comes from the Japanese verb saburo, which means to serve, and this tells us something crucial about their role in society. They were not just independent warriors seeking glory, they were bound by complex codes of loyalty and service that would shape every aspect of their lives, including their relationship with their weapons. The development of the katana as we know it today was a gradual process that took place over several centuries, and it's important to understand that the samurai didn't just wake up one day and decide to use curved swords. The evolution of Japanese swordmaking was influenced by both practical battlefield experience and cultural exchanges with other civilizations, particularly China and Korea. Early Japanese swords were actually straight, similar to those found in other parts of Asia, but as warfare evolved and the samurai began to fight more frequently on horseback, the need for a curved blade became apparent. A curved sword is much more effective when slashing from horseback, because the curve naturally follows the arc of the swing, allowing for more devastating cuts with less effort. The katana's distinctive curve, called sori, wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was a carefully calculated design feature that maximized the weapon's cutting efficiency. But the katana's deadly effectiveness wasn't just about its shape, it was about the revolutionary steel-making techniques that Japanese swordsmiths developed over centuries of experimentation and refinement. The process of creating a katana began with tamahagen, a type of steel produced in a clay furnace called a tatara, where iron-bearing sand and charcoal were smelted together for days at temperatures exceeding 1,400 degrees Celsius. This process produced steel with varying carbon content, and the swordsmith's skill lay in selecting and combining different pieces of this steel to create a blade that was both incredibly hard and surprisingly flexible. The technique of folding the steel, sometimes up to 16 times, wasn't just about removing impurities, it was about creating a homogeneous mixture that distributed the carbon evenly throughout the blade, resulting in a weapon that could hold an incredibly sharp edge while still being able to bend without breaking. The differential hardening process, where the edge of the blade was made harder than the spine, created what the Japanese called hamon, the beautiful temper line that you can see on authentic katana. This wasn't just decorative, it was functional, allowing the blade to have a razor-sharp cutting edge while maintaining enough flexibility in the spine to absorb the shock of impact without shattering. The result was a sword that could cut through armor, bone, and flesh with terrifying efficiency. yet was durable enough to withstand the rigors of constant combat. But even the most perfectly crafted katana would be useless in the hands of someone who didn't know how to use it properly. And this is where the samurai's training regimen becomes absolutely crucial to understanding their deadly effectiveness. Samurai training began in childhood and continued throughout their entire lives, creating warriors who were not just skilled with their swords, but who had developed an almost supernatural level of awareness, reflexes, and physical conditioning. The training wasn't just about learning to swing a sword, it was about developing what the Japanese called mushin, a state of mind where action happens without conscious thought, where the warrior and the weapon become one unified entity. Of responding to threats with lightning-fast precision, young samurai would begin their training with wooden swords called bokken, practicing basic cuts and stances thousands of times until these movements became as natural as breathing. They would progress to practicing with weighted training swords, then finally to lift steel, but always under the careful supervision of experienced masters who had spent decades perfecting their own techniques. The training was holistic, incorporating not just swordsmanship but also archery, horseback riding, spear fighting, and even poetry and calligraphy. Because the samurai believed that a warrior's mind needed to be as sharp and disciplined as his blade, they practiced kata, which were predetermined sequences of movements that allowed them to perfect their technique and develop muscle memory that would serve them in actual combat. These kata weren't just physical exercises, they were meditative practices that helped the samurai achieve the mental state necessary for effective combat. The concept of mei, or proper distancing, was fundamental to samurai swordsmanship, and masters would spend years teaching their students how to judge distances with perfect accuracy, how to close with an opponent at exactly the right moment, and how to maintain the optimal position for both attack and defense. The samurai also developed an understanding of timing that went far beyond simple speed. They learned to read their opponent's intentions, to anticipate attacks before they were launched, and to exploit the tiny windows of opportunity that presented themselves in the chaos of combat. This level of training created warriors who could draw their swords and strike with deadly accuracy in the time it takes most people to blink, a skill that was demonstrated in the art of iaijutsu, techniques that allowed a samurai to end a fight before it really began. The philosophical aspects of samurai training were just as important as the physical components, and the influence of Zen Buddhism on samurai culture cannot be overstated when examining why they were so effective with their katana. Zen taught the samurai to empty their minds of fear, doubt, and unnecessary thoughts, allowing them to act with pure instinct and perfect clarity in the heat of battle. The concept of accepting death, known as shino kokoro, freed the samurai from the paralyzing fear that affects most people in life or death situations, allowing them to fight with a calmness and focus that their opponents often found unnerving. This psychological advantage was perhaps even more important than their technical skills, because a warrior who has truly accepted death fights with a ferocity and determination that is almost impossible to match. The samurai believed that the katana was not just a tool but a spiritual extension of themselves, and they would often meditate while holding their swords, developing an almost mystical connection with their weapons. They named their swords cared for them like living beings, and believed that the spirit of the swordsmith lived within each blade, giving it unique characteristics and powers. This deep emotional and spiritual connection meant that when a samurai drew his katana, he wasn't just wielding a piece of steel, he was channeling centuries of tradition, countless hours of training, and a philosophy that viewed combat as a form of spiritual expression. The tactical applications of katana fighting were incredibly sophisticated, incorporating principles of leverage, timing, and positioning that maximized the weapon's effectiveness. The basic cuts, called kiryotoshi, were executed with the entire body, not just the arms, generating tremendous power while maintaining perfect balance and control. The samurai learned to use their opponent's momentum against them, deflecting attacks and immediately countering with devastating cuts that could end a fight in a single stroke. They mastered the art of fighting at different ranges, from the long-distance engagement, where they could use the full length of their blade, to the close-quarters combat, where they might use the crossguard or even the pommel as weapons. The concept of sen, or initiative, was central to samurai tactics, and they were trained to seize control of the fight from the very beginning, never allowing their opponents to dictate the pace or direction of the combat. Advanced samurai could, fight multiple opponents simultaneously, picking them off one by one with precisely timed strikes. The samurai also developed techniques for fighting in different environments, from open battlefields to narrow corridors, and they could adapt their fighting style to take advantage of terrain features or environmental conditions. Their training included fighting in darkness, in rain, on uneven ground, and even while wounded, ensuring that they could maintain their effectiveness regardless of circumstances. The psychological warfare aspects of samurai combat were just as important as the physical techniques, and the very presence of a skilled samurai on the battlefield could demoralize entire units of enemy troops. The samurai cultivated an aura of invincibility through their demeanor, their equipment, and their reputation, often ending conflicts before they began simply by appearing ready to fight. Their elaborate armor, distinctive helmets, and perfectly maintained weapons were not just practical items, but psychological tools designed to intimidate opponents and project an image of supernatural power. The ritual aspects of samurai combat, including the formal challenges, the ceremonial drawing of swords, and the precise etiquette of dueling, all serve to increase the psychological pressure on opponents who were often already intimidated by the samurai's reputation. When examining specific historical examples of samurai effectiveness with the katana, we can see how all these elements came together to create truly legendary warriors, whose exploits became the stuff of myth and legend. Miyamoto Musashi, perhaps the most famous samurai swordsman in history, demonstrated the deadly potential of katana mastery through his documented 61 duels, all of which he won, many with a single strike. Musashi's approach to swordsmanship was revolutionary, emphasizing adaptability, psychological warfare, and the use of unconventional techniques that caught opponents off guard. His famous duel with Sasaki Kojiro on Ganru Island in 1612 exemplifies the samurai approach to combat, where preparation, timing, and psychological dominance were just as important as technical skill. Musashi arrived late to the duel deliberately, keeping his opponent waiting and increasing his anxiety, then used a wooden sword carved from an oar instead of his katana, demonstrating such confidence in his abilities that he could defeat a renowned swordsman with an improvised weapon. The duel lasted only minutes, with Musashi delivering a single fatal blow to Kojiro's head. But the psychological buildup and strategic preparation took hours, showing how samurai combat was as much mental as physical. Other legendary samurai, like Minamoto Yoshitsune, who was said to be able to leap from tree to tree while fighting, or Tomo Gozan, one of the few female samurai warriors, demonstrated that katana mastery could transcend physical limitations. Through superior technique and mental discipline, these warriors weren't just strong or fast. They had developed their skills to such a level that they seemed to operate by different rules than ordinary fighters. The accounts of their battles, while sometimes embellished over time, consistently emphasized the same themes: lightning-fast draws, single, decisive strikes, and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate and counter their opponent's moves. The technological superiority of the katana compared to other contemporary weapons cannot be ignored when examining samurai effectiveness in combat. While European knights were wielding heavy, straight swords, designed primarily for thrusting, and other Asian warriors used various curved sabers, the katana represented a perfect balance of cutting power, durability, and handling characteristics that made it ideally suited to the samurai's fighting style. The blade geometry of the katana, with its distinctive ridgeline and carefully tapered profile, distributed stress in a way that maximized cutting efficiency while minimizing weight. The subtle curvature meant that each cut followed a natural slicing motion that required less energy to execute than the chopping motions required by straight swords. The katana's length, typically between 60 and 73 centimeters, provided excellent reach while still being maneuverable in close combat. And the sword's balance point, usually located just forward of the crossguard, allowed for both powerful cuts and quick recoveries. The quality of Japanese steel, particularly the famous Tamahagen, was superior to most other contemporary metallurgy, resulting in blades that held their edge longer and were less likely to break under stress. The differential hardening technique used in katana construction created a blade that was harder at the edge than European swords, but more flexible than Chinese weapons, combining the best characteristics of both approaches, the tsuba or handguard. was not just decorative but provided protection for the hands, while allowing for complex wrist movements that were essential to advanced techniques. The handle, or suka, was designed to provide a secure grip even when wet with blood or sweat, and its length allowed for both one-handed and two-handed techniques depending on the situation. The scabbard, or saya, was crafted to allow for the lightning-fast draws that were so characteristic of samurai combat, with the angle and position carefully calculated to minimize the time between the decision to draw and the completion of the first cut. The social and cultural factors that contributed to samurai deadliness with the katana are often overlooked, but were absolutely crucial to their effectiveness as warriors. The samurai class was supported by an entire social system that allowed them to dedicate their lives to the perfection of their martial skills without worrying about basic survival needs. Unlike peasant soldiers who might pick up a sword only, when called to war, the samurai lived and breathed combat training from childhood to death. Their social status as the warrior class meant that their entire identity was tied to their martial prowess, creating tremendous internal pressure to excel in a culture that celebrated martial achievement above all else. The concept of honor, or GI, was so deeply ingrained in samurai culture that failure in combat was literally worse than death, driving them to levels of dedication and sacrifice that would be difficult for modern people to understand. The samurai's relationship with death was fundamentally different from that of other warriors, viewing it not as something to be avoided, but as a constant companion that gave meaning and urgency to life. This acceptance of mortality freed them from the fear that paralyzes most people in combat situations, allowing them to fight with a clarity and determination that was almost impossible to match. The ritual suicide practice of seppuku wasn't just about honor. It was about maintaining the psychological edge that made samurai so effective in battle, knowing that they would rather die than live with the shame of defeat. The economic support system that maintained the samurai class meant that the best fighters could spend decades perfecting their skills without needing to worry about farming, craftsmanship, or trade, creating a level of specialization that was rare in medieval warfare. The master-student relationships that characterized, with each master adding their own innovations to the traditional forms, the competition between different schools of swordsmanship drove continuous improvement and innovation, as masters sought to develop techniques that would give their students advantages over warriors from rival schools. The integration of the katana into every aspect of samurai life, from religious ceremonies to social interactions, meant that these warriors were constantly practicing and refining their relationship with their weapons in ways that went far beyond formal training sessions. The battlefield effectiveness of samurai with katana was demonstrated repeatedly throughout Japanese history, from the Genpei War of the late 12th century through the Sengoku period and into the early Edo era, showing that their deadly reputation was based on consistent performance in actual combat rather than just legend and mythology. During the Mongol invasions of 1274 and 1281, samurai demonstrated their superiority in individual combat even when facing larger, better-equipped forces, with many accounts describing single samurai cutting through multiple enemies with their katana before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The effectiveness of samurai swordsmanship was so renowned that even after the introduction of firearms to Japan, many samurai continued to rely primarily on their katana, believing that superior skill with the blade could overcome technological disadvantages. The precision of katana techniques allowed samurai to target specific points on enemy armor where a single well-placed cut could disable or kill an opponent, making them incredibly efficient killers even against heavily armored foes. The speed of samurai attacks, particularly the iijutsu quick-draw techniques, meant that many fights were over before the opponent even realized they had begun, with the samurai's blade cutting through vital organs or major blood vessels in the time it took to blink. The adaptability of katana fighting styles allowed samurai to engage effectively against opponents using different weapons, from spears and polearms to clubs and axes, demonstrating the versatility of their training and the superiority of their weapon. The psychological impact of facing a master swordsman was often as important as the physical confrontation, with many enemies surrendering or fleeing rather than face almost certain death against a skilled samurai. The evolution of samurai training methods over the centuries shows a continuous refinement of techniques designed to maximize the deadly potential of the katana, with each generation of masters building upon the knowledge of their predecessors to create increasingly sophisticated fighting systems. The development of different schools of swordsmanship, each with their own specialized techniques and philosophies, created a diversity of approaches that made samurai unpredictable and difficult to counter in combat. The emphasis on spiritual development, alongside physical training, meant that the most skilled samurai achieved a level of mental clarity and focus that allowed them to perform at peak efficiency even under extreme stress. The integration of meditation, philosophy, and physical training created warriors who were not just skilled technicians, but complete fighting systems, capable of adapting to any situation. The legendary dueling culture of the samurai provided constant opportunities for testing and refining techniques against skilled opponents, ensuring that only the most effective methods survived and were passed on to future generations. The detailed records kept by various sword schools allow us to trace the evolution of specific techniques and understand how samurai continuously improved their methods based on actual combat experience. The influence of famous masters like Sukahara Bakuden, who is said to have never lost a duel in his lifetime, shows how individual innovations could spread throughout the samurai community and elevate the overall level of skill. The cross-training between different weapons systems meant that samurai developed a comprehensive understanding of combat that enhanced their effectiveness with the katana by teaching them how to fight against various types of opponents. The seasonal training regimens that exposed samurai to different weather conditions and environmental challenges ensured that they could maintain their effectiveness regardless of circumstances. The emphasis on fighting wounded or exhausted demonstrates the thoroughness of samurai preparation and their understanding that real combat rarely occurs under ideal conditions. The development of specialized techniques for fighting in armor, unarmored combat, and mixed situations shows the adaptability and practical nature of samurai training methods. The incorporation of battlefield tactics into individual training meant that samurai understood not just how to fight one-on-one, but how to be effective in larger military engagements. The study of anatomy and physiology that informed targeting techniques gave samurai a scientific understanding of how to inflict maximum damage with minimum effort. The practice of fighting blindfolded or in darkness developed heightened sensory awareness that could provide crucial advantages in actual combat situations. The emphasis on maintaining equipment to perfect standards ensured that samurai weapons were always at peak performance when needed most. The cultural significance of the katana in Japanese society elevated it beyond mere weaponry to the level of sacred object, creating a psychological and spiritual bond between warrior and weapon that enhanced combat effectiveness in ways that are difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. The crafting rituals surrounding katana creation, including purification ceremonies and spiritual blessings, reinforced the belief that these were not ordinary weapons but instruments of divine power. The passing down of ancestral blades through generations created emotional connections that motivated samurai to fight harder to prove themselves worthy of their inheritance. The artistic elements of katana design, from the elaborate fittings to the beautiful patterns in the steel, reflected the aesthetic sensibilities of a culture that saw combat as a form of artistic expression. The poetry and literature celebrating famous swords and their wielders created a cultural mythology that inspired samurai to achieve legendary status through their martial prowess. The religious significance of the katana in Shinto beliefs, where swords were considered to house divine spirits, gave samurai a sense of fighting alongside supernatural forces. The social rituals surrounding the wearing and drawing of katana reinforced their status as symbols of ultimate authority and power. The legal restrictions on who could carry katana reinforced their association with the samurai class and made them symbols of social superiority. The economic value of fine katana meant that possessing superior weapons was both a mark of status and a practical advantage that could mean the difference between life and death. The technical innovations in katana design and construction continued throughout the samurai era, with swordsmiths constantly seeking to improve upon already exceptional weapons. The development of different steel combinations and forging techniques created specialized blades for different types of combat and different user preferences. The refinement of heat treatment processes allowed for more precise control over blade characteristics, resulting in weapons that were perfectly matched to their intended use. The evolution of blade geometry and curvature patterns shows how even small changes could significantly impact cutting performance and handling characteristics. The improvement of mounting systems and fittings enhanced both the functionality and durability of katana while reflecting the aesthetic preferences of different periods. The standardization of certain measurements and proportions created consistency that allowed for interchangeable components and easier maintenance. The development of testing methods for evaluating blade performance ensured that quality standards were maintained across different smiths and regions. The documentation of forging techniques and written treatises preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost and allowed for the transmission of secrets between generations. The establishment of schools and lineages of swordsmiths created competitive environments that drove continuous innovation and improvement. The patronage system that supported master swordsmiths allowed them to experiment with new techniques without worrying about commercial pressures. The regional variations in style and technique created diversity that prevented the art from becoming stagnant while maintaining overall quality standards. The integration of foreign influences and materials shows how Japanese swordsmiths were willing to adopt innovations from other cultures when they proved superior to existing methods. The philosophical underpinnings of samurai swordsmanship, particularly the influence of Zen Buddhism and Confucian ethics, created mental frameworks that enhanced physical capabilities and contributed significantly to their deadly effectiveness. The concept of mushin, or no, eliminated the mental hesitation that could prove fatal in combat by allowing actions to flow directly from perception without conscious interference. The practice of zazen meditation developed powers of concentration and awareness that translated directly into superior combat performance. The emphasis on living in the present moment prevented samurai from being distracted by fear of death or hope for victory, allowing them to focus completely on the immediate requirements of combat. The acceptance of impermanence made samurai less attached to life and therefore more willing to take risks that could lead to victory. The cultivation of compassion, paradoxically, made samurai more effective killers by eliminating personal animosity that could cloud judgment and lead to mistakes. The development of intuitive understanding through meditation allowed samurai to perceive opponents' intentions before they were consciously formed. The practice of mindfulness in daily activities transferred to combat situations, allowing samurai to maintain awareness of multiple threats simultaneously. The emphasis on simplicity and directness in Zen philosophy influenced fighting techniques, eliminating unnecessary movements that could create openings for counterattack. The integration of breathing techniques from meditation practice helped samurai maintain calm and focus during the chaos of battle. The study of Buddhist concepts of interdependence gave samurai a holistic understanding of combat that encompassed psychology, timing, and environmental factors. The practice of non-attack. The cultivation of wisdom through study and meditation enhanced tactical decision-making and strategic thinking in both individual duels and larger battles. The development of compassionate strength allowed samurai to use violence as a tool for protecting others rather than merely satisfying personal desires for glory or revenge. The emphasis on continuous learning and self-improvement meant that even master swordsmen remained open to new ideas and techniques throughout their careers. The integration of physical and spiritual training created complete warriors whose capabilities exceeded the sum of their individual skills. The historical impact of samurai deadly effectiveness with the katana extended far beyond individual combat encounters to shape the entire course of Japanese history and culture. The superiority of samurai warriors allowed relatively small numbers of them to control large populations and vast territories, establishing a feudal system that lasted for centuries. The reputation of samurai swordsmanship became a form of psychological warfare that often ended conflicts before they began, saving countless lives through deterrence. The cultural elevation of martial arts to an aesthetic and spiritual level influenced Japanese attitudes toward craftsmanship, discipline, and excellence in all areas of life. The emphasis on honor and proper conduct in combat established ethical standards that influenced Japanese business and social practices for generations. The development of sophisticated training methods and philosophical frameworks provided models that were adapted for use in other fields from the arts to business management. The preservation of traditional techniques and knowledge through formal schools created educational systems that continued to function long after the samurai class itself had been abolished. The influence of samurai culture on Japanese national identity helped to maintain social cohesion and cultural distinctiveness. Even during periods of rapid change and foreign influence, the legendary status of great swordsmen provided inspirational figures that motivated successive generations to pursue excellence in their chosen fields. The artistic and literary traditions that grew up around samurai culture created lasting contributions to world civilization that continue to influence modern art, literature, and philosophy. The technical innovations developed for katana construction influenced other areas of Japanese metallurgy and craftsmanship, contributing to Japan's reputation for precision manufacturing. The psychological and philosophical insights developed through samurai training provided the foundation for modern Japanese approaches to education, sports, and personal development. The international recognition of samurai fighting prowess enhanced Japan's reputation and diplomatic position during periods of foreign contact. The preservation of samurai traditions through the modern era has provided valuable insights into human potential and the possibilities for personal transformation through disciplined practice. The global spread of Japanese martial arts has introduced millions of people to the principles and practices that made samurai so effective, creating a lasting legacy that continues to influence people around the world. So as we reach the end of our journey through the fascinating world of samurai and their deadly mastery of the katana, we can see that their effectiveness came not from any single factor, but from the perfect integration of superior technology, intensive training, philosophical depth, cultural support, and psychological preparation that created warriors who were truly greater than the sum of their parts. The katana itself was a masterpiece of metallurgy and design, but in the hands of an ordinary person, it would have been just another sword. It was the decades of training, the spiritual development, the cultural conditioning, and the social systems that supported the samurai class that transformed this excellent weapon into an instrument of legendary deadly power. The lessons we can learn from the samurai approach to mastery extend far beyond martial arts or military history. They show us what human beings can achieve when they commit themselves completely to excellence, when they integrate physical, mental, and spiritual development, and when they approach their chosen field with the dedication and seriousness that the samurai brought to their study of the sword. Whether you're trying to master a musical instrument, excel in a sport, build a business, or simply become a better person, the principles that made the samurai so deadly with their katana, the emphasis on continuous practice, the integration of mind and body, the acceptance of failure as part of learning, the development of mental clarity and focus, and the commitment to excellence in all things. These principles remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago in feudal Japan. The story of the samurai and their katana reminds us that true mastery is not about talent or luck, but about the willingness to commit ourselves completely to the pursuit of excellence, to practice with dedication even when progress seems slow, to integrate wisdom from multiple sources, and to approach our chosen field with the respect and seriousness that it deserves. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating warrior cultures and that you've found some inspiration in their dedication to mastery. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll explore another captivating chapter from the pages of history.